Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Insurance Journal's Academy of Insurance. I've been trying to find a shorter title for what this program is, and I can't. So I'll do the long one, and hopefully people will send cards and letters in. And it's the Thursday webinar after show, and it's the after show for our significant business auto endorsements webinar that we had today. It was a fantastic webinar, and we had great questions and a great instructor who is joining us on our after show today, Mr. Casey Roberts. And we're also joined by our oddly variously illuminated director, Mr. Patrick Raid as well. So that we don't usually give you a light show, but there's last time Frank Panaccio had to walk his dog, and we had a technical difficulty. So it's another Academy first. How many directors of the Academy of Insurance does it take to adjust a light bulb?
Apparently more than we have.
Fantastic. So everybody, welcome to the after show. And Casey, welcome. It's your first after show. So thanks a lot again for doing the webinar today and for being with us. You had so many answers to so many questions that people had, and I had a few questions that were sort of maybe off the beaten track. I'd like to ask a non-insurance related question first. You had said something about your father saying something about Florida, or as my father would say, Florida.
Florida.
I'm wondering if you could maybe, and you left it open-ended. You didn't say why you said that. So is it because of where your father's from, or
My dad,
what's the etymology there?
I'm a third generation Californian on my mother's side, but on my dad's side, I'm New Yorker. My dad was from Brooklyn, and he moved out to California in 46 and 1946. Okay, just so everyone understands, I'm not that old yet. But he still never lost all of his accent. And oil was not oil, it was more like Earl. Okay. And Florida wasn't Florida. He said it more like Florida. Now, I did get a couple great things from him, though. He raised me a Yankee fan, New York Yankees fan, and a Giants fan in the National League. So I can't complain. I think you did a pretty good job. But that's my dad reference.
Excellent.
No longer with us, but it was good.
I was wondering because we're really interested in how people pronounce things regionally. So when you said that, I just had to ask. It was I didn't want
My pleasure.
I didn't want to miss out on that. So you went into early in the webinar about the difference between an employee taking a car for the weekend and liability for that, as opposed to being on the road doing business. Like you mentioned, business pleasure trips. Like if they're somewhere over the weekend and they're using a car that's allocated in this way for recreational purposes instead of the business purposes. What if they're in the middle of a business day and they're doing something recreationally, like going to lunch or getting a candy bar or gas or something like that? I mean, I guess is it open to interpretation, like something in the middle of business being recreational that could be not covered under the policy, or is that too vague of a question?
No. Oh yeah, it is too big of a question. I'm not going to answer that. That's a great out. Give me another one like that, George.
All right.
You know what? No, I look at it. I think the courts would look at it this way. Now, again, trying to figure out what a court would say is always problematic. That's why we have courts and attorneys, etc. But I think they would look at it in the context of, look, does a person who's out making, let's just say a salesperson making sales calls, who then stops for lunch just by themselves, no business lunch or anything, and then goes and picks up a can of soup to take home later on that night for dinner, and then goes on to another business appointment. If something were to happen from the first appointment to when they went to lunch to when they pick up the soup, something were to happen in the intervening time, I don't think anyone's going to misconstrue that or assign that any sort of non-coverage type situation. To me, I think that would be going beyond the expectation of reality. And I think they would just tie it all together and say, look, this is, eventually they're going to go in the furtherance of the insurance business again. And so they'd probably tie it all straight and keep it in a nice little bow. At least that would be my expectation.
Gotcha. And you mentioned the employee, better have a personal auto policy. Is it up to the employer to, before the employee is requisitioned a car or rents a car for business on behalf of the employer, does the employer have to disclose that this is part of the business auto policy? And if they don't, are they liable for anything because they haven't disclosed this to the employee? Like, if like you're not on this policy, or this policy only covers you to a certain degree, and you better have a personal auto policy, is there any liability on the part of an employer if they don't fully disclose you know what I'm saying? Like,
Yeah. I thought you were going to go a different place with that question, though. Darn it. Not that I'm aware of. Okay. And again, that's kind of like the biggest caveat in the world, because I'm not aware of most things I find out as life goes forward. But not that I'm aware of. I think it would be a good business practice for the insured to say to their employees, look, do you have a personal auto policy in place? I think that would be a good business practice, just because then it could lend itself to a good discussion with the with the insured asking that of their employees, just to remind them that, hey, look, when you go and do this on our business, your policy is actually going to be primary, so just be aware of that.
gotcha.
Now, that would assume that the business owner has been properly educated by their agent or broker, right? Which is hopefully been done. But it's just one of those silly little things that it doesn't happen often, but when it does happen, it can be problematic for everyone. And those are the things that concern me. I don't get concerned with the stuff that happens all the time, because most people are pretty aware of that. Most people are aware, as they've seen, as an example, the fires that we're undergoing right now in California, that, well, they should pay more attention to their limits of how much coverage they have for their property, because it's so well broadcasted, it's so well known, although we still see people underinsured in a number of cases. But I think, on the auto side of things, so some of the stuff we talked about today, it can be a problem, because it's hard to say what people know, right? And for the most part, ours is a business that is laden with, 12 pages of contract on the business auto policy. And who in the heck reads that besides people on this call?
That's an excellent point. Patrick, what do you what questions might you have for Mr. Roberts today?
Well, it's interesting. Casey brought up some commercial trucking, long haul type risks and coverage, and he brought up the MCS 90. Can you just in about as brief as you know how, being an insurance person, tell us about the MCS 90? Where'd it come from? What's the requirements there?
338 words or less. Go.
Start counting now. Okay. So the MCS 90 came out of the Motor Carrier Act of 1980. Okay? And it essentially requires the operator of the vehicle, the owner of the vehicle per se, that's engaged in for-hire interstate commerce, for-hire interstate transportation of goods, to have an MCS 90 filing. And all the filing does is says this: if the owner / operator of the vehicle, because of their operation of the vehicle, causes a pollution event, that the insurance company will respond and clean it up. That's all it says. It's a financial guarantee that the insurance company will step into the shoes of the insured and clean up the pollution event. The negative of that is that it's not really pollution insurance. It reacts more like a bond. In the bond world, as you gentlemen know, if I have a bond with a company and they have to pay out on that bond, normally I have to go ahead and reimburse them for their expense on paying out on that bond. That's how the MCS 90 works. So if my insured has, I'm blowing up the 338 words, by the way, or sorry about that. if an insured has a loss that is covered under the MCS 90, the insurance company will respond. But then the insurance company has the right legally to come back and take action against the insured and say, reimburse us for the expense that we just paid for. And as we know, anytime the men and women in the white suits show up in their white bands with their respirators on, money starts ringing up on the cash register. So it's nice from the standpoint that it keeps the insured out of problems, but on the other hand, it adds a financial responsibility to the insured that they've got to respond to. And a lot of times, I just don't think people understand that.
So if they're transporting goods that could be considered a pollutant, whether it's a fuel tanker or a truck with 1,000 gallons of paint in it, then it would really be better. They'd be better served if finding a policy that would be better serve them than relying on the MCS 90.
Oh yeah, and see, the MCS 90 just says, okay, now you've met the responsibilities and requirements of the Motor Carrier Act. That's all it does. From that standpoint, that's why, they either need a good transportation pollution policy, which would be choice one, right? And I think people that do a lot of that type of hiring probably are going to take that as the option, or at the very least, they need that the commercial auto CA 9948 endorsement to take care of the cleanup of the pollution from the pollutants that they are carrying with them.
That actually segues into a question that I had when you were talking about the MCS 90, because you had said, I was wondering, and you kind of went into this, but I just wanted to get a little, if you could expand on it, is what is a pollutant, or how open to interpretation is what a pollutant is, because the policy seems to say, and if I missed that, I apologize, but you were describing like it has to be something that's transported in a certain way onto a vehicle and so forth. But then you were saying, oh, well, what if a contractor is going down the highway, and you talked about paint, or you mentioned weeds,
Not weeds.
Right, weeds. No, weeds. That's right. So I was wondering, in your estimation, I mean, I guess, should pollutants be more specifically delineated on the policy, or are they? And I didn't get that in what you were saying. So I'm just curious about that.
You know what? I left that out, and I realize now that you're bringing it up, George, that was probably not a good decision on my part. I should have probably used the definition of pollutions or pollutants, and I'll just read it because, we've always heard these terms. Pollutants means any solid, liquid, gaseous, or thermal irritant or contaminant. That gives us a list of stuff, which isn't just a limiting list, it's just giving us examples, including smoke, vapor, soot, fumes, acids, alkalis, chemicals, and waste. And then waste includes materials to be recycled, reconditioned, or reclaimed. That's a pretty lengthy list. And this has been language that has been around for years in our policies. I just read that off of the business auto policy. It's essentially the same language that we'll see in the commercial property policy. We'll see it in the commercial general liability policy. All these policies use the same definition of pollutants. And it's quite frankly that it's too difficult an exposure to get our arms around in the proverbial manner to address in a standard policy coverage like the auto or commercial property or the CGL. And so we leave it to the area of environmental carriers, environmental liability, where it's much better served. They can write a policy, charge an appropriate premium for those that have the exposure, and charge the premium to varying degrees based upon the true exposure of the insurance. Right? It's a great reminder, I think, to me of why we have exclusions. And one of the major reasons we have exclusions is not everything can be done, number one, and number two, not everyone has the exposure. And if we included it for everyone, the price we would have to increase our premiums to would probably put some people out of the marketplace. So those that need it can pay for it. Those that don't need it don't have to worry about it.
And Patrick, did you want to ask about weeds, or did that segue into a different question? Because I know she left that answer. Well, that's okay. We could save it for the next after show. Presuming you want to participate.
George, my thing about weeds in the webinar is just this, and I stole it from a good friend of mine, who shall remain nameless, because if I use her name, I probably have to send her some money, and I can't do that now. But she and I were talking one day about balloons, and she's a great insurance educator, and she said, she goes, balloons are like weeds, right? If the weed is just out there in the dirt and it's not bothering anyone, it's not really a problem. But when you find a weed in your garden, now it's a weed and you pull it out. That's how a pollutant is. A pollutant just by itself doesn't mean anything, but once it finds itself somewhere where it doesn't belong, that's when we've got issues.
Gotcha. Understood. Thank you. Patrick, over to you. Any parting thoughts?
I think that we covered it all pretty well. I appreciate Casey with the business auto endorsements. The business auto policy is, on its surface, a fairly simple and straightforward policy in some ways, but the requirements of these endorsements brings out some of these little details, such as the drive other car coverage and the employees as insureds endorsement and the like. So I appreciate you bringing those things out, and I was actually educated quite a bit today on, in particular, the MCS 90. Not my forte, so I appreciated that. Thank you.
Oh, my pleasure, gentlemen. As you know, it's and I don't say this lightly, and I'm not polishing your apples for you, but it's a pleasure and an honor to be asked to work with the Insurance Journal and to, provide, the work that I do. And so you put up with me on a couple, 2-3 times a year. I can't believe you're strong enough stomach-wise to handle it. But I appreciate that you both are. And I look forward to joining you again later on this year.
Well, we appreciate it. And you have to tell me that if I'm wrong here, but I don't think that I am. But I believe the first time that we had talked, I had just taken over this position, and I emailed out the instructors that had been in the past, introducing myself. And I believe you called me from the beach in Maui. Is that right?
Odds are that occurred, and I would love to get there now, but I'd have to self-quarantine for 14 days.
I mean, there are worse places.
That is true, but I'd rather self-quarantine at home than in Maui, quite honestly. If I go to Maui, I want to go out and take advantage. Rumor has it that hopefully the first quarter of next year, that might occur again. So if it does, Patrick, I promise you, I will call you just to let you know how good it is.
I appreciate it. I'll be here to take the call.
And even if and maybe we could get you to do a preview show from your accommodations in Maui. That'd be fun to see you in a different surrounding too.
Ooh, I like that thought.
All right.
And you know what? Don't tell the IRS, but that might make it easier to write that off.
Our lips are sealed.
There you go.
Can we cut that part out?
It might be too late for that.
Yeah,
that's okay.
Probably is. I'm thinking I made a mess of that one. Guys, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks, Casey, very much for joining us today, both for your expertise in the webinar and for the after show. Next week's webinar you might find entertaining as well, is Booze the Webinar with Kevin Amrine, and it's a talk about liquor liability, and we hope all you after show fans will tune in for that, as well as Casey, because even if only to see if Kevin has shaven his beard at all, and how much longer it's grown since the last after show we did for him. So Casey Roberts, thanks again for joining us. Really appreciate it. On behalf of our director, Patrick Rate, this is George, your humble host, saying thanks, everybody, and we will see you next time we have a webinar, which is next Thursday. So take care and stay safe.